A shocking tale of prejudice and secrets unfolds in a $3 million mansion. Millionaire twins wouldn't eat until their new black nanny did something. The widowed father married her. Asterisk, can you guess what she did to change everything? Stay tuned to find out. Asterisk, that person will not touch my grandchildren's food. Vivian Blackwood's shrill voice echoed through the $3 million mansion as she pointed a perfectly manicured finger at Camila. Just look at her, Thomas. Do you really think someone like that knows how to take care of children of our lineage? Camila stood motionless at the entrance to the Italian marble kitchen, clutching her purse with dignity as she watched the scene unfold. At 28, a pediatric nurse who graduated with honors from Atlanta University, she had seen prejudice before, but never as blatantly as she was seeing it now. Thomas Blackwood, a widower for 8 months, looked uncomfortably between his mother-in-law and the new nanny he had just hired. His 5-year-old twins, Lily and James, were once again refusing to eat, losing weight dangerously since their mother's death. 3 previous nannies, all white, all suitable according to Vivian, had failed miserably. "Mother, please," Thomas tried to intervene, but was immediately cut off. "Don't give me that, Thomas. You hired this young woman without even consulting me. These people have strange methods, exotic foods that could harm the children. What if she brings in diseases? What if I can really help your grandchildren?" Camila interrupted gently, her calm voice contrasting with Vivian's hysteria. "Because so far, from what I can see, they're wasting away under the proper care you value so much." The silence that followed was cutting. Vivian paled at the boldness of the response, while Thomas raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by the new employee's firmness. From upstairs, the twins' soft, constant crying continued, a sound that had become the soundtrack of that house since the funeral. Asterisk, what secrets was Camila hiding that could unravel this family? Keep listening to Real Stories Diary to uncover the truth. Asterisk, Camila had grown up as the only child of a single mother in the suburbs of Atlanta. She had worked since she was 14 to pay for college, specializing in childhood trauma after losing her own father at the age of 6. She knew how to recognize children in mourning, and she knew exactly how to help them. But she also knew she was entering hostile territory. "Can I at least try?" she asked Thomas directly, ignoring Vivian completely. 3 days. If in 3 days I can't get them to eat a full meal, I'll leave without causing any trouble. Vivian snorted indignantly. "Thomas, you can't seriously be considering 3 days," Thomas agreed, extending his hand to Camila. "But on one condition, my mother-in-law supervises everything." Camila squeezed his hand, feeling the rough texture of bitten nails, a sign of stress she recognized. "Well, perfect. She can learn a thing or two in the process." At that moment, while Vivian choked on her indignation, and Thomas watched her with a mixture of hope and skepticism, Camila kept a serene expression. What they didn't know was that she had already researched that family extensively, knew every detail of the children's trauma, and had a plan that went far beyond simply getting them to eat. If you're enjoying this story of overcoming adversity and prejudice, don't forget to subscribe to Real Stories Diary, because what happened over the next 3 days would forever change the dynamics of that mansion and reveal truths that the Blackwood family would rather keep hidden. Within the first 15 minutes inside the Blackwood mansion, Camila had already mentally catalogued every sign of emotional neglect that the other nannies had completely ignored. Lily was hiding under the stairs, hugging a dirty blanket that obviously hadn't been washed in weeks. James remained locked in his room, building towers with blocks only to knock them down violently. Classic behavior of a child processing trauma from abandonment. "Look!" Vivian pointed dramatically, as Camila knelt down to speak to Lily at eye level. "This person is dirtying my $15,000 Persian rug. Thomas, do you see this?" Thomas watched Camila talk softly to Lily, who, for the first time in months, had stopped crying. "She seems to be connecting with the children, Mom." "Connecting?" Vivian snorted. "These people have always been good for working in the kitchen, cleaning the house, gardening. But taking care of children of our social class? That's completely different. Lily and James need refinement, a proper education, not these influences." Camila pretended not to hear, as Lily whispered in her ear, "Grandma doesn't like you. She didn't like the last nanny because she was too young, the one before that because she was too short, and now she doesn't like you because I'm black." Camila finished naturally, without any embarrassment. And what do you think about that? Lily studied her with curious 5-year-old eyes. Mommy always said that people of different colors make the world more beautiful, like a rainbow. At that moment, Thomas felt something tighten in his chest. Isabella, his late wife, really used to say that, something he had completely forgotten in the last few months of mourning. Vivian, who had been listening to the conversation, turned pale. Thomas, you can't let her put those ideas in the children's heads. They'll grow up thinking what, exactly? Thomas interrupted, confronting his mother-in-law directly for the first time in months. That different people deserve respect? As the argument escalated in the living room, Camila took the opportunity to examine James, who had come downstairs, drawn by the voices. The boy was visibly malnourished, with deep circles under his eyes and a nervous tremor in his hands, signs she recognized from her time working in the pediatric ward at Atlanta Children's Hospital. James, she said softly, when was the last time you slept through the night? The boy looked at her in surprise. No one had ever asked him that question before. I don't remember. Sometimes I have nightmares that Mom is lost and hungry. Camila nodded, understanding the pattern immediately, abandonment trauma combined with survivor's guilt, textbook. She had seen it dozens of times during her 8 years at the hospital, especially with children who had lost parents in accidents. What if I told you a secret? She whispered conspiratorially. I also lost my daddy when I was your age. And you know what I learned? Mommies and daddies are never really lost when they're in our hearts. James watched her with an intensity that made Camila realize she had touched something deep. Behind her, the argument between Thomas and Vivian continued to escalate. She's been here less than an hour, and she's already brainwashing the children. Vivian raved. This is exactly what I was talking about. They have their own methods, Thomas. Methods that don't suit our family. Methods? Thomas repeated, incredulous. You mean talking to them like human beings? Vivian flushed red with anger. Don't give me that sarcasm. You know very well what I'm talking about. These people grow up in different environments, violent ones. They don't understand the subtleties of raising upper-class children. What if she causes trouble? What if the neighbors start talking? It was at that moment that Camila made a decision. She stood up calmly, wiped her hands, and walked over to where Vivian was gesticulating dramatically. Mrs. Blackwood, she said in a professionally calm voice that made everyone stop talking, you're right about one thing. I did grow up in a different environment than you did. Vivian smiled triumphantly, thinking she had finally won. I grew up in a home where my mother worked 3 jobs to keep me in school, Camila continued. Where I studied pediatric nursing on an academic merit scholarship, where I learned that traumatized children need understanding, not judgment, and where I discovered that the color of my skin never determined my ability to care for any child. The silence that followed was deafening. Thomas watched Camila with a look that mixed admiration and shame for his mother-in-law's attitude. Nurse, he repeated. You have a degree in nursing? Pediatric nursing, specializing in child trauma, Camila confirmed. I worked at Children's Hospital of Atlanta for 8 years before moving here. Your children are showing classic signs of reactive depression and post-traumatic stress disorder. Nothing that can't be treated with patience and the proper protocol. Vivian paled. She had spent the last 15 minutes attacking a qualified healthcare professional based purely on racial prejudice. But you applied to be a nanny, she stammered. Because sometimes, Camila replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, we need to be exactly where the universe wants us to be. And something tells me that these children need much more than just a nanny. In that moment, with Vivian clearly disarmed and Thomas looking at her with a mixture of respect and curiosity, Camila knew she had planted the first seed of her true mission there. What they didn't know yet was that her move to that town had not been a coincidence, and that her connection to the Blackwood family ran much deeper than any of them could have imagined. Each of Vivian's insults only strengthened something inside Camila that the privileged woman couldn't see, a quiet determination fueled by years of injustice that had prepared her for this exact moment, when she would finally have the opportunity to prove that underestimating someone because of the color of their skin would be the biggest mistake the Blackwoods had ever made. Over the next 3 days, something extraordinary began to happen at the Blackwood mansion. For the first time in 8 months, Lily and James not only ate full meals, but asked for seconds. Camila had implemented what she called an emotional reconnection protocol, a technique she had learned while working with orphan children at the hospital. "Impossible," Vivian muttered, watching from the living room window as Camila played in the garden with the children. "She must be giving them some kind of medication. This isn't natural." Thomas, on the other hand, couldn't take his eyes off the scene. It had been months since he had seen his children laugh like that. Camila had turned a simple lunch into a fun experience, teaching Lily and James how to make animal-shaped sandwiches while telling them stories about nutrition that the children absorbed like sponges. "Does she have a degree from a real university?" Vivian asked suspiciously when Thomas mentioned Camila's qualifications over dinner. "Because those southern institutions don't always have the same standards as our elite universities." "Atlanta University, Mom, one of the best in the country for pediatric medicine," Thomas replied, pouring himself more wine. "And she graduated with highest honors." Vivian snorted. "Highest honors or not, Thomas, you need to think about the children's future. The neighbors are already talking. Margaret Wellington called me yesterday, asking about the new employee. You know how these things spread in our community." Just then, Camila appeared at the dining room door, holding a tablet. "Mr. Blackwood, I need to talk to you about the children's progress. It's hospital protocol to document everything." Thomas motioned for her to come closer, but Vivian stood up abruptly. "Thomas, this can wait. We have family matters to discuss." "Actually," Camila said calmly, sliding the tablet across the table, "this is a family matter. Lily has gained 2.5 pounds in 3 days. James has stopped having nightmares, and both have shown significant signs of recovery from the trauma of abandonment." Thomas took the tablet, impressed by the detailed documentation Camila had prepared: weight charts, behavioral analyses, photographs of the children smiling, all meticulously recorded with timestamps and technical observations. "Where did you learn to write reports like this?" he asked, genuinely impressed. "Standard hospital protocol," Camila replied. "We always document progress in cases of childhood trauma, but there's something else I need to discuss with you." Vivian sat back down, clearly uncomfortable with the professional competence Camila displayed with every interaction. "James told me something interesting today," Camila continued, watching both their reactions. "He said his mother used to sing a specific song to them to help them fall asleep, 'Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star,' but in a different version. He called it the Black Mommy Song." The silence that followed was deafening. Thomas paled, dropping the tablet on the table. Vivian froze like marble. I don't understand," Thomas stammered. "Children have interesting memories," Camila said softly. "Sometimes they remember things adults would rather forget." James also mentioned that his mom had a special friend who sang to them when she was very sick. At that moment, Camila's phone vibrated. It was a message she had been waiting for since she arrived in town. "Excuse me," she said, looking at the screen. "I have to take this. It's important." Camila left the room and answered the call in the garden, where she knew she wouldn't be overheard. "Dr. Peterson," she said quietly into the phone. "Yes, I got access to the medical records." "No, they don't suspect anything yet." "Yes, doctor. The children confirmed everything we expected. Isabella really did tell them about Grace." On the other end of the line, Dr. James Peterson, Camila's former boss at Atlanta Children's Hospital, sighed heavily. "Camila, are you sure about this? Accusing a high society family of hiding information about a death is very serious." "Doctor, you know that Isabella Blackwood did not die in a car accident," Camila said firmly. "She died from complications of lymphoma that she had been hiding from her family for months. And Grace Williams, the private nurse who had been treating her secretly, disappeared mysteriously 3 days before Isabella's death." Grace Williams, who happened to be Dr. Peterson, began. "My older sister," Camila finished. "And I came here to find out not only what happened to her, but why a millionaire family would make a black woman disappear after she devoted herself to caring for a terminal patient." Through the living room window, Thomas watched Camila on the phone, noticing the seriousness on her face. Something about her posture, the way she held the phone, suggested that this conversation was much more important than a simple business call. "Vivian," he said slowly, "do you remember the private nurse Isabella hired during the last months of her life? The one who came to take care of her when we thought she was just tired?" Vivian turned pale. "Why are you asking me this now, Thomas?" "Because," Thomas replied, watching Camila end the call and walk back into the house, "I have a feeling that our new nanny knows a lot more about our family than she's letting on." When Camila returned to the room, she had a different expression. Still professional, still controlled, but there was something in her eyes that hadn't been there before, a determination that made Vivian shift uncomfortably in her chair. "Sorry for the interruption," Camila said, putting away her phone. "It was a call about an old case at the hospital. Sometimes the past catches up with us in unexpected ways." Thomas and Vivian exchanged a quick glance, both realizing that this comment carried a weight that went far beyond its superficial words. "Well," Vivian said, forcing a smile, "I think we've discussed enough for today." "Thomas, didn't you say you had important calls to make?" But Thomas couldn't stop watching Camila, trying to decipher what had changed in her expression after that call. There was something about her, something he couldn't quite put his finger on, that made him feel simultaneously attracted and slightly uneasy. Camila smiled kindly at them both. "I'm going to check on the children before retiring. Good evening, Mr. Blackwood, Mrs. Blackwood." As she climbed the stairs, Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that he had just witnessed the moment when a key piece of a much larger puzzle had fallen into place. What he didn't know was that Camila Williams hadn't arrived at that house by chance, and that the conversation he just witnessed was only the first move in a game she'd been planning for much longer than any of them could have imagined. On Friday morning, exactly 1 week after her arrival, Camila came down to breakfast carrying a leather briefcase and a tablet. Thomas immediately noticed the change in her demeanor. There was something definitive in her movements, as if a long game had finally come to an end. "Good morning," she greeted calmly, serving pancakes to Lily and James, who ran to hug her, as they had done every morning since she arrived. Vivian, who had just entered the kitchen, stopped when she saw the briefcase. "What's that? Are you quitting?" "Because if you are, I always said that actually," Camila interrupted her gently, "I came to return something that has belonged to this family for a long time." She opened the briefcase and took out a photograph, placing it on the marble countertop. Thomas approached and paled instantly. It was a photo of Isabella in the hospital, clearly very ill, next to a black woman in a white coat who was holding her hand affectionately. "Do you know this person?" Camila asked, watching their reaction. Vivian stood rigid as a stone. Thomas took the photo with trembling hands. "That's Grace Williams," Camila continued, her voice still calm, but laced with something dangerous. "Palliative care nurse, specializing in cancer. She took care of Isabella during the last 6 months of her life, when you thought she was just too tired to leave the house." I don't understand," Thomas stammered. But his eyes revealed that he understood perfectly. "Grace Williams is my older sister," Camila revealed, and the silence that followed was deafening. "And she disappeared 3 days before Isabella died. Curiously, on the same day, Isabella signed a will significantly altering the children's inheritance." Vivian finally found her voice. This is blackmail." "Thomas, call the police." "Blackmail?" Camila laughed humorlessly, pulling more documents from the folder. "Let's see what real blackmail is." She spread papers across the counter. "Here are the bank transfers you made to Grace, $50,000 for discretion about Isabella's diagnosis. Here, the confidentiality agreement you forced her to sign. And here," Camila paused dramatically, pulling out a digital recording, "the phone conversation where you, Vivian, threatened to report Grace to immigration for practicing medicine illegally if she didn't disappear immediately after Isabella's death." Thomas let out a sound of shock. "Mom, you didn't do that." "She did," Camila confirmed, pressing play on the audio. Vivian's shrill voice echoed through the kitchen. "Listen carefully, you stuck-up little black girl. Isabella is dead. You got your dirty money. Now get out of here before I make sure you're deported like the intruder you are." Thomas's face went completely white. Vivian tried to deny it, but the words simply wouldn't come out. Grace had to flee the city within 24 hours, Camila continued relentlessly. She abandoned her life, her apartment, her dreams of setting up a clinic for patients in need. All because a privileged woman decided that a black nurse who knew her family secrets was a threat. "You can't prove any of this," Vivian managed to whisper. Camila smiled coldly. "I can, and I will. You know what the beauty of modern technology is, Vivian?" Grace recorded everything. Every conversation, every threat, every bank transfer. She knew people like you would try to silence her. Thomas leaned against the counter, clearly in shock. Isabella had cancer for 6 months? Advanced lymphoma, Camila confirmed softly. She wanted to protect you from the pain of watching her waste away. Grace respected that decision, even though she knew she would be vilified for it later. "And you came here to what? Get revenge?" Vivian asked, trying to regain some control. "I came to get justice for my sister," Camila corrected, "and to ensure that Lily and James grow up knowing the truth about how their mother really died, surrounded by love and professional care, not alone in an accident, as you preferred to believe." At that moment, Camila addressed Thomas directly. "Your wife left letters for the children, Thomas. One for each birthday until they turn 18. Grace had them, but she had to run away before she could give them to them. They're here." She tapped the folder. Thomas began to cry silently. "Daddy?" Lily approached, sensing the tension in the air. "Why are you sad?" Vivian, realizing she was losing everything, made one last desperate attempt. "Thomas, you can't believe this opportunist. She came here with a plan from the beginning." "Yes, I did," Camila admitted without hesitation. "I came to find out what happened to my sister. But I also came because 2 innocent children were suffering because of the toxic secrets you kept. And in the process, I found something I didn't expect." She looked directly at Thomas. "I found a good man who deserves to know the truth about the extraordinary woman he lost. And 2 children who deserve to grow up honoring their mother's real memory, not a sanitized version created to protect a family's pride." Thomas approached Camila, his eyes red but determined. "What do you want? Money, compensation for your sister?" "I want Grace to be able to come home," Camila replied simply. "I want her to receive the recognition she deserves for caring for Isabella with such dedication when her own family chose to live in denial. And I want Vivian to face the legal consequences of her threats and discrimination." Vivian exploded. "You can't do that. I have lawyers. I have connections. And I have the truth," Camila replied calmly. "Recorded, documented, and witnessed. Plus, I have something your connections can't buy, a clear conscience for having fought for what's right." In that moment, as Vivian realized her world of privilege was crumbling, and Thomas began to understand the extent of what he had lost, Camila knew that justice would finally be served. But the real victory wouldn't be Vivian's downfall. It would be seeing Grace able to return home with her head held high, and Lily and James growing up knowing the truth about their mother's unconditional love. 6 months later, the headline in the local newspaper read, "Heirs convicted of racial discrimination and threats, $2 million fine." Vivian Blackwood had lost not only the lawsuit, but also her position on 5 charity boards and the respect of the entire social elite she valued so much. She had to sell the family mansion to pay the damages. Thomas told Camila, as they watched Lily and James play in the garden of their new home, smaller, cozier, more real, she moved to an apartment across town. "It seems she discovered that money can't buy dignity when you've lost all of yours." Camila smiled, adjusting the engagement ring Thomas had given her the previous month. He had proposed in the kitchen amid burnt pancakes and children's laughter, exactly how she had always dreamed true love would be. "And Grace?" Thomas asked, as he had every week since Camila's sister had returned to town. "She's opening her community clinic next week," Camila replied proudly. "With the settlement money and donations from people who heard her story, she'll be treating underprivileged children for free." Exactly the dream Vivian almost destroyed. Grace had become a minor local celebrity after the story came out. Newspaper interviews, invitations to speak about discrimination in the healthcare system, and, most importantly, public recognition that she had been an exceptional nurse, unjustly persecuted because of racial prejudice. "Daddy! Camila!" Lily ran to hug them, using the nickname she had invented that melted both their hearts every time. "Aunt Grace is here." Grace Williams walked through the garden, carrying a box wrapped in colorful paper. At 35, she had finally regained the sparkle in her eyes that Camila hadn't seen since before her forced escape from the city. "The letters," Grace announced solemnly, handing the box to Thomas. "Isabella wrote one for each birthday until they're 18. She wanted you to know how much she loved you, even when she couldn't be there." Thomas held the box with trembling hands, finally understanding the depth of love his wife had felt for him and the children. "Did she know she was dying?" "For the last 3 months, yes," Grace replied gently. "But she also knew you would be all right. Especially after she met Camila." "She met Camila?" James asked, confused. Grace smiled. "Your mom saw a picture of my little sister when I showed it to her in the hospital. She said, 'That girl has the eyes of someone who cares for people with true love.' If Thomas ever needs someone special in his life, I hope it's someone like her." The silence that followed was filled only by the wind in the trees and the distant sound of children laughing in the neighborhood. "So Mom knew," Lily whispered. "Moms always know," Camila replied, hugging both children. "And she chose well. She chose for you to grow up with lots of love." 3 days later, during the inauguration of the Grace Williams Clinic for Community Pediatric Care, a crowd gathered to support the new entrepreneur. Thomas was the first official donor, contributing $100,000 from his own pocket. "It's the least I can do," he said into the microphone during the ceremony, "to make up for the mistakes of the past and support a future where no competent professional is judged by the color of their skin instead of their qualifications." Across town, Vivian watched the live broadcast on her cell phone from her small 2-bedroom apartment. Alone, morally and financially bankrupt, she finally understood that prejudice had cost her much more than her fortune. It had cost her her family. That night, as Camila put Lily and James to bed, she reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her there. She had arrived at that house as a temporary nanny, seeking justice for her sister. Now, she was about to become a wife and adoptive mother, and she had helped build something much bigger. "Do you regret anything?" Thomas asked when she came downstairs. "That I waited so long to come here," Camila replied without hesitation. "Grace suffered 2 unnecessary years because I took so long to gather the courage to investigate what really happened. And I regret that it took me so long to realize that the most extraordinary woman I've ever met was right in front of me," Thomas said, pulling her into a hug. In the end, Vivian Blackwood had tried to use privilege and prejudice to silence a talented black woman. Instead, she had only revealed her own moral mediocrity and paved the way for 2 extraordinary sisters to turn an injustice into an inspiring victory. The real irony was that in trying to keep Grace in her place, Vivian had created the perfect conditions for both Grace and Camila to achieve far greater success and recognition than they would have if they had never been challenged by her ignorance. Camila learned that sometimes the best revenge is not to destroy those who hurt you. It is to build something so beautiful and impactful that their malice becomes just a small obstacle you overcame on your way to greatness. Have you ever witnessed situations where prejudice was the downfall of those who practiced it? How would you react if you found out that someone close to you had been the victim of unfair discrimination? Leave your opinion in the comments and subscribe to Real Stories Diary for more stories that prove that, in the end, justice always finds a way, especially when it has the help of courageous people willing to fight for what is right.